Cursed, cursed creator, why did I live? Why in that instant did you not extinguish the spark of existence which you had so wantonly bestowed? I know not. Despair had not yet taken possession of me. My feelings were those of rage and revenge. I couldn't with pleasure have destroyed the cottage and its inhabitants, and have gutted myself with shrieks and misery. Then, when night came, I quitted my retreat and wandered in the wood, and now, no longer restrained by the fear of discovery, I gave vent to my anguish in fearful howling, like a wild beast that had broken the toils, destructing the objects that obstructed me, and raging through the wood with stag-like swiftness. Oh, what a misery night I passed! The cold stars shone in mockery, and the bare trees waved their branches above me. Now and then the sweet voice of a bird burst forth amidst the universal stillness. All save I, where the rest were in enjoyment. I, like the arch-fiend, bore a hell within me. Finding myself unsympathized with, wished to tear out the trees, spread havoc and destruction round me, and then to have sat down and enjoy the ruin. But this was a luxury of sensation I could not endure. I became fatigued with the excessively bodily exertion, and sank on the damp grass, in the sick impotence of despair. There were none such myriads of men that existed who would pity or assist me. And should I feel kindness towards my enemies? No. From that moment I declared everlasting war against the species, and more than all, against him who had formed me, and sent me forth in this insupportable misery. The sun rose, I heard voices of men, knew that all impossible return to my secret during the day. According, I hid myself in the same thick underwood, determining to devote ensuing hours on reflection on my situation. The pleasant sunshine and the pure air of day restored me to some degree of tranquillity, and, when I considered what had passed at the cottage, I could not help believing that I had been too hasty in my conclusions. I had certainly acted imprudently, and it was apparent that my conversation had interested the father in my behalf, and I was a fool of having exposed my person to the horror of his children. I ought to have familiarized the old Delancey to me, and by degrees to have discovered myself to the rest of the family, when they should have been prepared for my approach. But I did not believe my errors to be irretrievable, and after such consideration I resolved to return to the cottage, seek the old man, and by my reputations win him to my party. These thoughts called me, and in the afternoon I sank into a profound sleep, but the fever of my blood did not allow me to be visited by peaceful dreams. The horrible scene that preceding day was forever acting before my eyes. The females were flying, the enraged Felix tearing me from his father's feet. I awoke exhausted, and finding that it was already night, I crept forth from my hiding place and went in search of food. When my hunger was appeased, I directed my steps toward the well-known path that conducted to the cottage. All was at peace. I crept into my hovel and remained in silent expectation for the accustomed hour when the family rose. The hour passed, the sun mounted high in the heavens, but the cottagers did not appear. I trembled violently, fearing some dreadful misfortune. Inside the cottage was dark, and I heard no motion. I cannot describe the agony of this suspense. Presently, two countrymen passed by, but pausing in the cottage, they entered into the conversation, using violent gesticulations, but I did not understand what they said, and as they spoke the language of the country which drifted from my protectors. Soon after, however, Felix approached with another man. I was surprised, as I knew he had not quitted the cottage, and in the morning waited anxious to discover from his discourse and meaning these unusual appearances. Do you consider, said his companion to him, that you will be obligated to pay 3 months' rent, and to lose the produce of your garden? I do not wish to take any unfair advantage. I beg, therefore, that you will take some days to consider your determination. It is utter uselessness, replied Felix. We can never again inhabit your cottage. The life of my father is in the greatest danger, owing to the dreadful circumstance that I have related. My wife and my sister will never recover from their horror. I entreat you to reason with me more. Take possession of your tenement, and let me fly from this place." Felix trembled violently as he said this. He and his companion entered the cottage, in which they remained for a few minutes, and then departed. I never saw any of the family of De Lancey more. I continued to remain of the day in my hovel, in a state of utter and stupid despair. My protectors had departed, and broken the only link that held me to the world. For the first time, feelings of revenge and hatred filled my bosom, and I did not strive to control them, but, allowing myself to be borne away in the stream, I bent my mind towards injury and death, when I thought of my friends, and the mild voice of De Lancey and the gentle eyes of Agatha, that exquisite beauty of the Arabian. These thoughts vanquished the gush of tears, somewhat soothed me, but again, when I reflected what they had spurned and deserted me, anger returned. A rage of anger, and unable to endure anything human, I turned my fury towards inanimate objects. As night advanced, I placed a variety of combustibles around the cottage, and after having destroyed every vestige of cultivation in the garden, I waited with forced impatience until the moon had sunk to commence my operations. As the night advanced, a fierce wind arose from the woods, quickly to disperse the clouds that sat loitering in the heavens. The blast tore along like a mighty avalanche, produced a kind of insanity in my spirits that burst all bounds of reason and reflection. I alighted the dry branch of a tree, and danced with fury around the devoted cottage. My eyes, so fixed on the western horizon, the edge of which the moon nearly touched, a part of its orb was at length hid, and I waved my branch. It sang. A loud scream, I fired the straw and heath and bushes, which I had collected. The wind fanned the fire, and the cottage was quickly enveloped by the flames, which clung to it, and licked it with their forked and destroying tongues. As soon as I was convinced that no assistance save any part of habitation, I quitted the scene and sought for refuge in the woods. And now, with the world before me, whither should I bend my steps? I resolved to fly far from the scene, by fortunes but to me hated and despised. Every country must be equally horrible. At length, the thought of you crossed my mind. I learned from your papers that you were my father, my creator, and to whom could I apply more fitness to him than giving me life? Among the lessons that Felix had bestowed upon Sophie, geography had not been omitted. I had learned from these relative situations of different countries of earth. You had mentioned Genvena as the name of your native town. Towards this place I resolved to proceed. But now I was directing myself. I knew I must travel to the southwesterly direction to reach my destination, but the sun was my only guide. I did not know the names of towns that I was to pass through, nor could I ask information from a single human being, but I did not despair. From you only I could hope for succor, although towards you I felt no sentiment but that of hated, unfeeling, heartless creator. You had bestowed me with perceptions and passions, and then cast me abroad an object for scorn and horror of mankind. But you had only had I claim for pity and redness, and from you I determined to seek that justice for which I vainly attempt to gain from any other being that wore the human form. My travels were long and sufferings. I endured intense. It was late in autumn when I quitted the district where I had so long resided. I traveled only at night, fearful of encountering the visage of a human being. Nature decayed around me, and the sun became heatless. Rain and snow poured around me. Mighty rivers were frozen. The surface of the earth was hardened and chill and bare. I found no shelter. O earth, how often did I imprecate curses upon the cause of my being? The mildness of my nature had fled, and all within me was turned to galley bitterness. The nearer I approached your habitation, the more deeply did I feel the spirit of revenge enkindled in my heart. Snow fell, the waters were hardened, but I rested not. A few incidents now and then directed me, and I posed a map of country, but I often wandered wide from my path. The agony of my feelings allowed me no respite. No incident occurred from which my raging misery could not extract its food. But a circumstance had happened when I arrived on the confines of Switzerland. When the sun had recovered its warmth, the earth began to look green, confirmed in the expressive manner of tenderness and horror my feelings. I generally rested during the day, until only when I was secure for the night from view of man. One morning, however, finding that my path lay through a deep wood, I ventured to continue my journey after the sun had risen. The day, which was the first of spring, cheered even me the loveliness of its sunshine and balminess of the air. I felt emotions of gentleness and pleasure that had long appeared dead, revived within me. Half surprising by the novelty of these sensations, I allowed myself to be borne away by them, forgetting my solitude and deformity, dared to be happy. Soft tears began to bedew my cheeks, and I even raised my human eyes with thankfulness towards the blessed sun, which bestowed such joy upon me. I continued to wind among the paths of wood until I came to its boundary, which was skirted by a deep rapid river, into which many trees bent their branches, now budding with fresh spring. Here I paused, not exactly knowing what path to pursue, when I heard the sounds of voices that induced me to conceal myself under the shade of a cypress, which was scarcely hidden when a young girl came running towards the spot where I was concealed, laughing as she ran from someone in the sport. She continued her course along the previous side of the river, then suddenly her foot slipped, and she fell into the rapid stream. I rushed to my hiding place with extreme labor, from the force of the current saved her, and dragged her to shore. She was senseless, and I endeavored by every means in my power to restore animation. Then I was suddenly interrupted by the approach of a rustic, who was probably the person whom she was playfully fled. On seeing me, he darted towards me, tearing the girl from my arms. Hastened toward the deeper part of the wood. I followed speedily. I hardly knew why, but when the man saw me draw near, he aimed a gun, which he carried at my body, and fired. I sank to the ground, and my injurer, with increased swiftness, escaped in the wood. This was the reward for my benevolence. I had saved a human being from destruction, and as recompense I was withered under miserable pain of a wound which shattered the flesh and bone. The feelings of kindness and gentleness which I had entertained but a few moments before gave place to hellish rage and gashing of teeth. Inflammable pain. I vowed eternal hatred and vengeance to all mankind, but the agony of my wound overcame me. My pulses paused, and I fainted. For some weeks I led a miserable life in the woods, endeavoring to cure the wound which I had received. The ball had entered my shoulder, and I knew not whether it had remained there or passed through at my rate. I had no means of extracting it. My sufferings were augmented by the post-sense of injustice and ingratitude of their infliction. My daily vows rose for revenge, a deep and deadly revenge, such would alone compensate for the outrage and anguish I had endured. After some weeks, my wound healed. I continued my journey. The labors I endured were no longer to be elevated by the bright sun or gentle breezes of spring. All joy was but a mockery, which insulted my desolate state. It made me feel more painfully that I was not made for the enjoyment of pleasure. But my toils now drew near a close, and in 2 months from this time I reached the byres of Geneva. It was evening when I arrived, and I retired to a hiding place among the fields that surrounded it, to meditate in the manner I should apply to you. I was oppressed by a figure and hunger, and far too unhappy to enjoy the gentle breeze of the evening, or prospect of the sun setting behind the stupendous mountains of Jura. At this time, a slight sleep relieved me from the pain of reflection, which was disturbed by the approach of a beautiful child, who came running into the recess I had chosen. With all sportiveness of infancy, suddenly, as I gazed upon him, an idea seized me, that this little creature, unprejudiced and lived too short a time to have inhabited a horror of deformity, if, therefore, I could seize him, educate him as thy companion and friend, I should not be so desolate in this peopled earth. Urged by this impulse, I seized on the boy as he passed, and drew him towards me. As soon as he beheld my form, he placed his hands before his eyes and uttered a shrill scream. I drew his hands forcibly from his face and said, "Child, what is the meaning of this? I do not intend to hurt you. Listen to me." He struggled violently. "Let me go," he cried. "Monster, you ugly wretch! You wish to eat me and tear me to pieces. You are an ogre. Let me go. I will tell my papa. Boy, you'll never see your father again. You must come with me. Hideous monster, let me go. My papa is a syndicate. He is M. Frankenstein. He will punish you. You dare not keep me. Frankenstein, you belong then to my enemy. You him towards whom I have sworn eternal revenge. You shall be my first victim. The child still struggled and loaded me with epithets which carried despair to my heart. I grasped his throat to silence him, and in that moment he lay dead at my feet. I gazed on my victim. My heart swelled with exultation and hellish triumph. Clapping my hands, I exclaimed, I am to create desolation. My enemy is not invulnerable. His death will carry despair to him, and 1,000 other miseries shall torment and destroy him. As I fixed my eyes on the child, I saw something glittering on his breast. I took it. It was a portrait of a most lovely woman. In spite of my malignity, it softened and attracted me. For a few moments I gazed with delight on her dark eyes, framed on deep lashes and her lovely lips. But presently my rage returned. I remembered that I was forever deprived of the delights of such beautiful creatures could bestow, and that she whose resemblance I consented would, in regarding me, have changed that air of divine dignity to one expressive disgust and affright. Can you wonder what such thoughts transported me with rage? I only wonder that at that moment, instead of venting my sensations in explanations of agony, I did not rush among mankind and perish in the attempt to destroy them. While I was overcome by these feelings, I left the spot where I committed the murder, seeking a more secluded hiding place. I entered the barn, which had appeared to me to be empty. A woman was sleeping on some straw. She was young, not indeed so beautiful as her portrait I held, but of an agreeable aspect, and blooming in loveliness of youth and health. Here, I thought, is one of those whose joy-imparting smiles are bestowed on all but me. And then I bent over her and whispered, Awake, fairest, thy love is near. He who would give his life to obtain one look of affection from thine eyes. My beloved, awake. The sleeper stirred. A thrill of terror ran through me. She would indeed awake, and see me and curse me, and denounce the murderer. Thus would she sure act if her darkened eyes opened, and she beheld me. The thought was madness. It stirred the fiend within me. Not I, but she shall suffer the murder I have committed, because I am forever robbed of all that she could give me. She shall atone. The crime had its source in her. Be hers the punishment. Thanks to the lessons of Felix and the singular Eliza Mans, I learned how to work mischief. I bent over her and placed the portrait securely on the folds of her dress. She moved again, and I fled. For some days I hunted the spot where these scenes had taken place, sometimes wishing to see you, sometimes resolved to quit the world and its mysteries forever. At length, in wandering towards these mountains, I have thought through their range immense recesses, consumed by a burning passion which you alone can gratify. We may not have part until you have promised to comply with my recognition. I am alone and miserable. Man will not associate with me, but one as deformed and horrible as myself will not deny herself to me. My companion must be the same species, and have the same defects. This being you must create. Chapter 7. Being finished speaking, and fixing his looks upon me in the expressionless of a reply. But I was bewildered, perplexed, and unable to arrange any ideas sufficient to understand the full extent of his proposition. He continued, You must create a female for me, with whom I can live in interchange of those sympathetic necessary for my being. This you alone can do, and I demand it of you as a right which you must not refuse to concede. The later part of this tale, and kindly anew in me the anger that died away while he narrated his peaceful life among the cottagers. And as he said this, I could no longer suppress the rage that burned within me. I do refuse it, I replied, and no torture shall ever extort a consent from me. You may render me the most miserable of men. You shall never make me in my own eyes. Shall I create another like you, whose joint wickedness might desolate the world? Begone, I have answered you. You may torture me, but I will never consent." "You are in the wrong," replied the fiend, "and instead of threatening, I am consent to reason with you. I am malicious because I am miserable. I am not shunned and hated by all mankind. You, my creator, would tear me pieces in triumph. Remember that, and tell me why I should pity a man more than he pities me. You would not call it murder if you could precipitate me into one of those ice rifts and destroy my frame, the work of your own hands. Shall I respect the man that he condemns me? Let him live with me in interchange of kindness and instead of injury? I would bestow every benefit upon him with tears of gratitude at his acceptance. But that cannot be. The human senses are insurmountable barriers to our union. Yet mine shall not be submissive of object slavery. I will revenge my injuries. If I cannot acquire love, I will cause fear, and chiefly towards you, my arch enemy. Because, my Creator, I do swear inextinguishable hatred. Have a care, I will work at your destruction, nor finish until I desolate your heart, so that you shall curse the hour of your birth. Fiendish rage animated him. As he said this, his face was wrinkled into contortions and too horrible for human eyes to behold. But presently he calmed himself and proceeded. I intend to reason. This passion is detrimmed to you, for you do not reflect that you are the cause of its success. If you any being felt emotion of benevolence towards me, you should return them 110-fold. For what one's creature's sake, I shall make peace with the whole kind. But I now indulge in dreams of bliss and cannot be released. Why, I ask, is you responsible moderate? I am a creature of another sex, but as hideous as myself. The gratification is small, but it is all I can receive, and all shall content me. It is true, we shall be monsters, cut off from all the world, but on the account we shall be more attached to one another. Our lives will not be happy, but they will be harmless, and free of misery I now feel. Oh, my Creator, make me happy. Let me feel gratitude towards you for one benefit. Let me see that I excite sympathy for some existing thing. Do not deny me my request. I was moved. I shuddered when I thought of the possible consequences of my consent. But I felt that there were some justice to this argument. His tale and feelings, how now expressed, proved him to be a creature of fine sensations, and did I not think his Maker owed him all portion of the happiness that is in my power to bestow? I saw my change of feeling and continued. If you consent, neither you nor any other human shall ever see us again. I will go to the vast wilds of South America. My food will not be of man. I do not destroy the lamb and the kid to glut my appetite. Acorns and berries afford me sufficient nourishment. My companion will be of the same nature as myself, and will be content with the same fare. We shall make our bed of dried leaves. The sun will shine on us as on man, and will ripen our food. The picture I present you is peaceful and human, and you must feel that you deny it. Only in wantoness of power or cruelty, pitilessness have you been towards me. I now see compassion in your eyes. Let me seize the favorable moment and persuade you to promise that I so ardently desire. You propose, replied I, to fly from habitations of man, to dwell in those wilds where beasts of the field will be your only companions. How can you, long for love and sympathy of man, persevere in this exile? You will return and again seek their kindness, and you will meet their detestation. Your evil passions will be renewed, and you will then have a companion to aid you in the task of destruction. This may not be case to argue the point, for I cannot consent. How inconsistent are your feelings! But a moment ago you were moved by my representations. Why do you again harden yourself to my complaints? I swear to you, by the earth which I inhabit, and by you that made me, that the companion you bestow, I will quit the neighborhood of man and dwell, as it chance, in the most savage places. My evil passions will have fled, for I shall meet with sympathy. My life will flow away quietly, and in my dying moments I shall not curse my Maker. His words had a strange effect upon me. I compassionated him and sometimes felt a wish to console him. But when I looked upon him, when I saw the filthy mass moved and talked, my heart sickened, and my feelings were altered to those of horror and hatred. I tried to stifle these sensations. I thought that I could not sympathize with him. I had no right to withhold from him the small portion of happiness which was yet in my power to bestow. You swear, I said, to be harmless, but to have not already shown a degree of malice that should reasonably make me distrust you. May not even be a feint that will increase your triumph by according a wider scope of your revenge. Is this I must not be trifled with, and I demand an answer. If I have no ties and no affections, hatred and vice must be my portion. The love of another will destroy the cause of my crimes, and I shall become the thing of whose existence everyone will be ignorant. My vices are the children of the forced solitude that I abhor, and my virtues will necessarily arise, and I will live in communication with an equal. I shall feel affections of a sensitive being, and become linked to the chain of existence, and events which I am now excluded. I paused some time to reflect on all he had related, and the various arguments which he had employed. I thought of a promise of virtues which he had displayed on the opening of his existence, and the subsequent blight of the kindly feeling by the loathing and scorn which his protectors had manifested towards him. His power and threats were not omitted. In my calculations, a creature who could exist in ice caves of glaciers and hide himself from pursuit along ridges of inaccessible precipices was possessing qualities it would be vain to cope with. After a long pause of reflection, I concluded that justice due both to him and my fellow creatures demanded me that I should comply with his request. Turning to him, therefore, I said, I consent to your demand, on your solemn oath to quit Europe forever, and every other place in the neighboring of man. As soon as I shall deliver into your hands a female who will accompany you in your exile. I swear, he cried, by the sun and the blue sky of heaven, and by fire of love that burns in my heart, that if you grant me my prayer while they exist, you shall never behold me again. Depart to your home, and commence your labors. I shall watch their progress with undeterred anxiety. And fear not, but when you are ready, I shall appear. Saying this, he suddenly quitted me, fearful perhaps of any changes in my sentiments. I saw him descend the mountain with greater speed than the flight of an eagle, and quickly lost among the undulations of a sea of ice. His tail had occupied the whole day, and the sun was upon the verge of the horizon when he departed. I knew that I ought to hasten my descent towards the valley, as I would soon be encased in darkness, but my heart was heavy and my steps slow. The labor of winding along the little path of the mountain had fixed my feet firmly as I advanced. It perplexed me, occupied as I was by the emotions which occurrences of the day had produced. Night was far advanced than I became to. The halfway resting place had seated myself beside the fountain. The stars shone in intervals as clouds passed from over them. The dark pines rose before me. Every here and there a broken tree lay on the ground. It was a scene of wondrous solemnity, and squirred strange thought within me. I wept bitterly, clasping my hands in agony. I exclaimed, "O stars and clouds and winds, you are all about to mock me. If you really pity me, crush the sensation and memory. Let me become as naught. But if not, depart, and leave me in darkness." These are wild and miserable thoughts, but cannot describe to you how eternal twinkling of the stars weighed upon me, and how I listened very blast of wind, as it were a dull, ugly sirex on its way to consume me. Morning dawned before I arrived at the village of Claremix. I took no rest, but returned immediately to Geneva. Even in my own heart, I could give no expression to my sensations. They weighed on me, with the mountain's weight, and their excess destroyed my agony beneath them. Thus I returned home. Entering the house, I presented myself to the family. My haggard and wild appearance awoke intense alarm, but I answered no question. Scarcely did I speak. I felt as if I were placed under a ban, as if I had no right to claim their sympathies, as if evermore I enjoy companionship with them. Yet, even thus, I loved them to adoration. To save them, I resolved to dedicate myself to the most abhorred task. The prospect of such occupation made every other circumstance of existence pass before me like a dream. The thought only had a reality of life. Day after day, week after week. Chapter 18. Day after day, week after week, passed by on my return to Genva, and I could not collect the courage to recommence my work. I feared the vengeance of disappointing the fiend, yet I was unable to overcome my repugnance to the task which was enjoined to me. I found that I could not compose a female without again devoting several months of profound study and laborious disquisition. I had heard of some discoveries having been made by an English philosopher, the knowledge of which was material to my success, and sometimes thought of obtaining my father's consent to visit England for this purpose. But I clung to every present of delay, and shrank from taking the first step in the undertaking, whose immediate necessity began to appear less absolute to me. A change indeed had taken place in me. My health, which had hitherto declined, was now much restored. My spirits, when unchecked by the memory of my unhappy promise, rose proportionally. My father saw this change with pleasure, and he turned his thoughts towards the best method of eradicating the remains of my melancholy, which every now and then would return by fits, and with devouring blackness outcast the approaching sunshine. At these moments I took refuge in the most perfect solitude. I passed whole days on the lake alone in the little boat, watching the clouds and listening to the rippling of the waves, silent and listless. But fresh air and bright sun seldom failed to restore me to some degree of composure. And on my return I met the solutions of my friends with a readier smile and more cheerful heart. In this after return, one of these rambles, my father calling me aside, thus addressed me. I am happy to remark, my dear son, that you have resumed your former pleasures, and seem returning to yourself, and yet you are still unhappy, and still avoid our society. For some time I was lost in conjecture as to the cause of this, but yesterday an idea struck me, and if it is well founded, I conjure you to avow it. Reserve on such point would it not be useless, but to draw down treble misery on us all. I trembled violently at his exorcism, and my father continued, I confess, my son, I have always looked forward to your marriage with our dear Elizabeth, as a tie of your domestic comfort and a stay on my declining years. You are attached to each other from your earliest infancy. You studied together and appeared in dispositions and tasks. Entirely suited to one another, but also blind, is the best experience of a man that what I conceive to be the best assistance to my plan have been entirely destroyed it. You, perhaps, regard her as your sister, without any wish that she might become your wife. Nay, you may have met with another whom you may love. Considering yourself as bound in honor to Elizabeth, this struggle may occasion the poignant misery which you appear to feel. My dear father, reassure yourself. I love my cousin, tenderly and sincerely. I never saw any woman who excited as Elizabeth does. My warmest admiration and affection, my future hopes and prospects are entirely bound up in the expectation of our union. The expression of your sentiments of this subject, my dear Victor, gives me more pleasure than I have for some time experienced. If you feel thus, we shall surely be happy, however present events may cast a gloom over us. But it is this gloom which appears to have taken so strong a hold of your mind that I wish to dissipate. Tell me, therefore, you object to immediate socialization of marriage. We have been unfortunate. The recent events have drawn us from everyday tranquillity befitting my years and infirmities. You are younger, yet I do not suppose, possessed as you are of a competent future, and an early marriage would at all interfere with future plans of honor and utility that you may have formed. Do not suppose, however, that I wish to dictate happiness to you, or that a delay to your part would cause me any serious uneasiness. Interpret my words with candor and answer me. I conjure you with confidence and sincerity. I listened to my father in silence, remained for some time incapable of offering any reply. I revolved rapidly in my mind, a multiple of thoughts and endeavor that arrived in some conclusion. Alas, to me, an idea of immediate union with my Elizabeth was one of horror and dismay. I was bound by a solemn promise, which I had not yet fulfilled and dare not break. Or if I did, the manifold miseries might not impend over me and my devoted family. Could I enter into a festival with this deadly weight hanging around my neck and bowing me to the ground? I must perform my engagement and let the monster depart with his mate before I allow myself to enjoy the delight of a union from which I expected peace. I remembered also the necessity imposing upon me of either journeying to England or entering into a long correspondence with those philosophers of that country, whose knowledge and discoveries were indispensable use to me in my present undertaking. The later method of obtaining a desirable intelligence was dilatory. It was unsatisfactory. Besides, I had an innumerable aversion to the idea of engaging myself in my loathsome task in my father's house, while inhabitants of familiar intercourse with those I loved. I knew that 1,000 fearful accidents might occur, and the slightest of which would disclose a tale to thrill all connected with me with horror. I was aware also that I should often lose all self-command, all capacity of hiding the harrowing sensations that would possess me during the process of my unearthly occupation. I must absent myself from all I loved while thus employed. Thus commenced, it would quickly be achieved, and I might be restored to my family in peace and happiness. My promise fulfilled, the monster would depart forever, or so my fond fancy imagined. Some accident might meanwhile occur to destroy him and put an end to my slavery forever. These feelings dictated my answer to my father. I expressed a wish to visit England, but concealing the true reasons of this request. I clothed my desires under a guise which excited no suspicion, while I urged my desire with earnestness that easily induced my father to comply. After so long a period of absorbing melancholy that resembled madness in its intensity and effects, he was glad to find that I was capable of untaking pleasure in the idea of such a journey. He hoped that change of scene and varied amusement would, before my return, have restored me entirely to myself. The duration of my absence was left to my own choice. A few months, or most a year, was the period contemplated. One pattern kind of precaution he had taken to ensure me having a companion without previous communion with me. He had, in concert with Elizabeth, arranged that Clerval should join me at Strasbourg. This interfered with the solitude I commenced with the precision of my task. Yet, at the commencement of my journey, the presence of my friend could in no way be impermitted, and truly I rejoiced that thus should be saved many hours of lonely, maddening reflection. Nay, Henry might stand between me and the intrusion of my foe. If I were alone, would he not at times force his abhorred presence on me and remind me of my task, or contemplate its progress? To England, therefore, I was bound. It was understood that my union with Elizabeth should take place immediately upon my return. My father's age rendered him extremely averse to delay. For myself, there was one reward. I promised myself from the test toils, one consolation from my unbearable sufferings. It was the prospect of that day when, enfranchised with my miserable slavery, I might claim Elizabeth and forget the past in my union with her. I now made arrangements for my journey, but one feeling haunted me, which filled me with fear and agitation. During my absence, I should leave my friends unconscious of the existence of their enemy and unprotected from his attacks. Exasperated he might be by my departure, but he had promised to follow me wherever I might go. And would he not accompany me to England? This imagination was dreadful in itself, but soothing inasmuch as it supposed the safety of my friends. I was agonized with the ideas of the possibility that reversed of what might happen. But through the whole period during which I was a slave to my creature, I allowed myself to be governed by the impulses of the moment, and my present sensations strongly intimated that the fiend would follow me, except my family from the danger of his machinists. It was the later end of September that I again quitted my native country. My journey had been my own suggestion, and Elizabeth therefore acquiesced, but she was filled with disquiet at the idea of my suffering away from her. The inroads of misery and grief, it had been her care which provided me a companion in Clerval, and yet a man is blind to 1,000 minute circumstances, which call forth a woman's scandalous attention. She longed to bid me hasten my return. 1,000 conflicting emotions rendered her mute. She bade me a tearful, silent farewell. I flew myself into a carriage that was to convey me away, hardly knowing whither I was going, and careless of what was passing around. I remembered only, and it was a bitter anguish that reflected on it, to order that my chemical instruments should be packed to go with me. Filled with dreary imaginations, I passed through many beautiful, majestic scenes, but my eyes were fixed on the unobserving. I could only think of the bourne of my travels, and the work which was to occupy while they endured. In some days spent in listless indolence, during which I travelled many leagues, I arrived at Strasbourg, where I waited 2 days for Clerval. He came. Alas, how great was the contrast between us! He was alive to every new scene, joyful when he saw the beauties of the setting sun, and more happy when he beheld it rise and recommence a new day. He pointed out to me the shifting colors of the landscape, and appearances of the sky. This is what it is to live, he cried. Now I enjoy existence. But you, my dear Frankenstein, wherefore are desponding and sorrowful? In truth, I was occupied by gloomy thoughts, and neither saw a descent of the evening star, nor the golden sunrise reflected in the Rhine. And you, my friend, would be far more amused with the journal of Clerval, who observed the scenery with an eye of feeling and delight, than in listening to my reflections. I, a miserable wretch, haunted by a curse that shut up every avenue to enjoyment. We had agreed to descend the Rhine in a boat from Strasbourg to Rotterdam, whence we might take a ship passing for London. During this voyage we passed many willowy islands, and saw several beautiful towns. We stayed a day in Malines, and on the 5th from our departure from Strasbourg arrived at Mayence. The course of Rhine below Mayence became much more picturesque. The river descends rapidly and winds between hills, not high but steep. In beautiful forms we saw many ruined castles standing on the edge of precipices, surrounded by black woods, high and inaccessible. This part of Rhine, indeed, presents a singularly varied landscape. In one spot you view rugged hills, ruined castles overlooking tremendous precipices, with the dark Rhine rushing beneath, and on sudden turn of a parmy, flourishing vineyards with green sloping banks and meandering river and populous towns occupy the scenes. We traveled at time of the vintage and heard the song of laborers as we glided down the stream. Even I, depressed in mind, and my spirits continually agitated by gloomy feelings, was pleased. I lay at the bottom of the boat, and as I gazed on the cloudless blue sky, I seemed to drink in tranquillity, to which I had long been a stranger. And if these were my sensations, who can describe those of Henry? He felt as if he had been transported to a fairyland, enjoying the happiness seldom tasted by man. I have seen, said he, the most beautiful scenes of my own country. I have visited the lakes of Lawrence and Erie, where the snowy mountains descend upon particular to water, casting black and impenetrable shades, which would cause a gloomy and mournful appearance, were it not for the most verdant islands that relieve the eye of their gray appearance. I have seen this lake agitated by the tempest, when the wind tore up the whirlwinds of water, and gave you an idea of what the water spout must be on the great ocean, and the waves dashed with fury in the base of the mountain, where the priest and his mistress were overwhelmed by avalanche, and where their dying voices are still said to be heard amid the pauses of the nightly wind. I have seen mountains of La Vidas and the Pays of Divad, but this country, Victor, pleases me more than all wonders. The mountains of Switzerland are more majestic and strange, but there is charm in the banks of this divine river, and I never saw before equaled. Look at the castle which overhangs yon precipice, and that also on the island, almost concealed amongst the foliage of those lovely trees, and how that group of laborers, coming from among their vines, and the village half hid in the recess of the mountain. Oh, surely the spirit that inhabits that guards this place has a soul more in harmony with man than those who pile the glacier or retire to the inaccessible peaks of the mountains of our own country. Clerval, beloved friend, even now it delights me to record your words, and to dwell on the praise on which you are so eminently deserving. He was being formed in a very poetic nature. His wild and enthusiastic imagination was chastened by the sensibility of his heart. His soul overflowed ardent affections, and his friendship was that devoted and wondrous nature that the worldly minded teach us to look for which imagination. But even human sympathies are not sufficient to satisfy his eager mind. The scenery of exuberant nature, which others regard only with admiration, he loved with adore. The sounding contrast haunted him like a passion. The tall rock, the mountain, and the deep and gloomy wood, their colors and their forms, were then to him an appetite, a feeling, and a love that had not need a remote charmer, though supplying any interest, are borrowed from the eye. And where does he exist? He is this gentle and lovely being lost forever? Has his mind so replete in ideas and imaginations, fanciful and magnificent, which formed a world, whose existence depended on the life of its creator? Has this mind perished? Does it now only exist in my memory? No, it is not thus. Your form, so divinely wrought and beaming with beauty, has decayed, but your spirit still visits and consoles your unhappy friend. Pardon this gush of sorrow. These ineffectual words are but a slight tribute to the unexampled worth of Henry, but they soothe my heart, overflowing with the anguish which he embraces creates. I proceed my tale. Beyond Clogny, we descended into the plains of Horoland, which we resolved to post a reminder of our way till the wind was contrary, and the stream of the river was too gentle to aid us. Our journey here lost interest arising from beautiful scenery. When we arrived a few days at Rotterdam, whence we proceeded by to England. It was on a clear morning in the later days of December that I first saw white cliffs of Britain. The banks of the Thames presented a new scene. They were flat but fertile, and almost every town was marked by the remembrance of some story. We saw Tilbury Fort, and remembered the Spanish Armada, Gravesend, Woolwich, Greenwich, places which I had heard of even in my country. At length we saw the numerous steeples of London, St. Paul's towering head, and above all, the tower famed in English history. Chapter 19. London was our present point of rest. We determined to remain several months at this wonderful and celebrated city. Clerval desired an intercourse with the men of genius and talent who flourished at this time, but this was with me a secondary object. I was principally occupied with the means of obtaining the information necessary for the contemplation of my promise, and quickly availed myself of the letters of introduction I had brought with me to address to the distinguished natural philosophers. If this joy had taken place during my days of study and happiness, it would have afforded me inexpressible pleasure, but a blight had come over my existence, and I had visited these people for the sake of information they might give me on the subject, at which my interest was so terribly profound. Company was irksome to me. When alone, I could fill my mind with the sights of heaven and earth. The voice of Henry soothed me, and I could thus cheat myself into a transitive peace. But busy, uninterestingly, joyous faces brought back the spirit of my heart. I was an insurmountable barrier placed between me and my fellow men. This barrier was sealed with blood of William and Justin, and to reflect on the events connected with those names filled my soul with anguish. But in Clerval I saw the image of my former self. He was inquisitive and anxious to gain experience and instruction. These differences of manners which he observed was to him an unextinguishable source of instruction and amusement. He was pursuing an object he had long had in view. His design was to visit India, in the belief that he had in his knowledge of its various languages, and in the views he had taken of its society, the means of materially assisting the progress of European colonization and trade. In Britain, only he could further the execution of his plan. He was forever busy, and the only check to his enjoyments was my sorrowful and dejected mind. I tried to conceal this as much as possible, that might not debar him from the pleasures of natural, to one who was entertaining a new scene of life, undisturbed by care or bitter recollection. I often refused to accompany him, alleging another engagement, that I might remain alone. I also began to collect the materials necessary for my new creation, and this was to me like the torture of single drops of water continually falling on the head. Every thought was devoted to it. With extreme anguish, and every word that I spoke in allusion to it caused my lips to quiver, and my heart to palpitate. After passing some months in London, we received a letter from a person in Scotland, who had been on our visit at Gava. He mentioned the beauties of his native country and asked us if we were not sufficient allurements to encourage us to prolong our journey as far north as Perth, where he resided. Clerval eagerly desired to accept this invitation, and I, although abhorred society, wished a new view again mountain streams, and all the wonderful works which nature adorns her chosen dwelling places. We had arrived in England in the beginning of October. It was now February. We accordingly determined to commence our journey towards the north at the expiration of another month. This expedition we did not intend to follow the great road of Edinburgh, but visit Windsor, Oxford, Madoc, and the Cumberland Lakes, resolving to arrive at the completion of this tour about the end of July. I packed up my chemical instruments and materials I had collected, resolving to finish my labors in some obscure nook in the northern lands of Scotland. We quitted London on the 26th of March, and remained a few days at Windsor, rambling in its beauteous forest, and this was new scene to us mountaineers. The majestic oaks, the quantity of game, the herds of stately deer, were all novelties to us. From thence we proceeded to Oxford. As we entered the city, our minds were filled with remembrance of the events that had transacted there more than a century and a half before. It was where that Charles and I collected his forces. The city had remained faithful to him, after the whole nation had forsaken his cause to join the standard of parliament and liberty. The mention of that unfortunate king and his companions, that admirable Falkland, the insolent Goring, his queen, and his son, gave a peculiar interest to every part of the city which they might be supposed to have inhabited. The spirit of elder days found a dwelling here, and we delighted to trace its footsteps. If these feelings had not found an imaginary gratification, the appearance of the city had yet, in itself, sufficient beauty to obtain our admiration. The colleges are ancient and picturesque. The streets are almost magnificent, and the lovely Isis flows beside it through the meadows of exquisite verdure. This spread forth into place of expansive waters, which reflects its majestic assemblage of towers and spires and domes, and blossom among aged trees. I enjoyed this scene, and yet my enjoyment was embittered both by the memory of the past and the anticipation of the future. I was formed for peaceful happiness during my youthful days. Discontent never visited my mind, and if I was ever overcome by ennui, the sight of what was beautiful in nature or a study of what is excellent, the sublime and productions of man, could always interest my heart and communicate elasticity into my spirits. But I am a blasted tree, and dolt has entered my soul, and I felt that I should survive to exhibit what I shall soon cease to be, a miserable spectacle of wretched humanity, pitiable to others and intolerable to myself. We passed a considerable period at Oxford, rambling among its environs, and endeavoring to identify a very spot which might relate to the most animating epoch of English history. Our little voyages of discovery were often prolonged by successive objects that presented themselves. We visited the tomb of illustrations, Hapden, in the field on which that parrot fell. For a moment my soul was elevated from its debasing and miserable fears to contemplate the divine ideas of liberty and self-sacrifice, of which these signs were monuments in remembrance. For an instant, I dared to shake off my chains and look around me with a free and lofty spirit, but the iron had eaten into my flesh, and I sank again, trembling and hopeless, into my miserable self. We left Oxford with regret and proceeded to Matlock, which was our next place of rest. The country and the neighboring of his village resembled, to a great degree, the scenery of Switzerland, but everything is on a lower scale. The green hills want the crown of distant white Alps, which always settle on the piney mountains of my native country. We visited the Wonders Cave and little cabinets of natural history, where the curiosities are disposed in the same manner as collections of Servox and Kameks. The later name made me tremble when pronounced by Henry, and I hastened to quit Matlock, which that terrible scene was thus associated. From Derby, still journeying northwards, we passed 2 months in Cumberland and Westmoreland. I could now almost fancy myself among the Swiss mountains. The little patches of snow yet lingered on the northern sides of the mountains. The lakes and the dashing of rocky streams were all familiar and dear sights to me. Here remained some acquaintances who almost contrived to cheat me into happiness. The delight of Clerval was proportionally greater than mine. His mind expanded in the company of men of talent, and he found his own nature greater capacities and resources that he could imagine himself even possessed. While he associated with his inferiors, I could pass my life here, said he to me, and among these mountains I should scarcely regret Switzerland and the Rhine. But he found that a traveler's life is one that includes much pain amidst its enjoyments. His feelings are forever on the stretch, and when he begins to sink into repose, he finds himself obligated to quit that on which he rests in pleasure for something new, which again engages his attention, which also he forsakes for other novelties. We had scarcely visited the various lakes of Cumberland and Westmoreland, and conceived an affection for some of its inhabitants when the period of our appointment with our Scotch friend approached. We left them to travel on. For my own part, I was not sorry. I had now neglected my promise for some time, and I feared the effects of the demon's disappointment. He might remain in Switzerland and wreak his vengeance on my relatives. This idea pursued me, and tormented me every moment from which I might otherwise snatch repose and peace. I waited for my letters with feverish impatience. If they were delayed, I was miserable and overcome by thousands of fears. And then they arrived. I saw superscription Elizabeth or my father. I hardly dared to read the assertion of my fate. Sometimes I thought that the fiend followed me and might expedite my reminiscences by murdering my companion. When these thoughts possessed me, I would not quit Henry for a moment, but followed him as his shadow to protect him from the fancied rage of his destroyer. I felt as if I had committed some great crime, the consciousness of which haunted me. I was guiltless, but I had indeed drawn down a horrible curse upon my head, as immortal as that of crime. I visited Edinburgh with languid eyes and mind, and yet that city might have interested the most unfortunate being. Clerval did not like it so well as Oxford, for the equanimity of the latter city was more pleasing to him, but the beauty and regularity of the new town of Edinburgh, its romantic castle and environs. The most delightful in the world, authors see St. Burdon's Well and the Pensil Hills compensated him for the change, and filled him with cheerfulness and admiration. But I was impatient to arrive at the termination of my journey. We left Edinburgh in a week, passing through Campor, St. Andrews, and along the banks of Tay to perch where our friend expected us. But I was in no mood to laugh and talk with strangers, or enter into the feelings, and accordingly I told Clerval that I wished to make towards Scotland alone. Do you, said I, enjoy yourself, and let this be our rendezvous. I may be absent a month or two, but do not interfere with my motions. I entreat you, leave me to peace and solitude for a short time, and when I return, I hope it will be with a lighter heart, more congenial than your own temper. Henry wished to defeat me, but seeing he bent on his plan, ceased to remonstrate. He entreated me to write often. I had rather be with you, said he, in your voluntary rambles, than these Scottish people, whom I do not know. Hasten then, my dear friend, to return, that I may again feel myself somewhat at home, which I cannot do in your absence. Having parted with my friend, I determined to visit some remote spot of Scotland, and finish my work in solitude. I did not doubt but that the monster followed me, and would discover himself to me when I should have finished, that he might receive his companion. With this resolution, I traversed the northern highlights and fixed on one of those remotest of the Orkneys as the scene of my labors. It was a place fitted for such work, being hardly more than a rock whose high sides were continually beaten upon by the waves. The soil was barren, scarcely affording pasture for a few miserable crows, and oatmeal for its inhabitants, which consisted of 5 persons, whose gaunt and scraggly limbs gave tokens of their miserable fare. Vegetables and bread, when they indulged in such luxuries, and even fresh water, was to be procured from the mainland, which is about 5 miles distant. On the whole island, there were but 3 miserable huts, and one of these was vacant when I arrived. This I hired. I contained only 2 rooms, and these exhibited all the squalidness of the most miserable penury. The thatch had fallen in, the walls were unplastered, the door was off its hinges. I ordered it to be repaired, bought furniture, and took possession, an incident which would have doubtless have occasioned some surprise that not all scenes of cottages been benumbed by want and squalid poverty. As it was, I lived ungazed at, and unmolested, hardly thanked for pittance of food and clothes which I gave. Oh, so much does suffering blunt even the coarse sensations of men. In this retreat I devoted the morning to labor, but in the evening, when the weather permitted, I walked on the stony beach of the sea to listen to the waves as they roared and dashed at my feet. It was monotonous, yet ever-changing scene. I thought of Switzerland. It was far different from this desolation and a plodding landscape. Its hills were covered with vines, and its cottages were scattered thickly in plains. Its fair lakes reflect a blue and gentle sky, and when troubled by winds, their tumult is but as the play of a lively infant when compared to the roaring of the giant ocean. It was this manner I distributed my occupations. When I first arrived, I was preceded by my labor. It was because every day more horrible and irksome to me. Sometimes I could not prevail on myself to enter my laboratory for several days, and other times I toiled the day and night in order to complete my work. It was indeed a filthy process in which I was engaged. During my first experiment, a kind of enthusiastic frenzy had blinded me to the horror of my employment. My mind was intent fixedly on the consumption of my labor, and my eyes were shut to the horror of my proceedings. But now I went to it in cold blood. My heart often sickened at the work of my hands. Thus situated, employed in the most detestable occupation, immersed in a solitude where nothing could for an instant call my attention from the actual scene in which I was engaged, my spirits became unequal. I grew restless and nervous. Every moment I feared to meet my persecutor. Sometimes I sat with my eyes fixed on the ground, fearing to raise them, lest they should encounter the object which I so most dreaded to behold. I feared to wander from the sight of my fellow creatures, lest when alone he should come to claim his companion. At the meantime I worked on, and my labor was already considerably advanced. I looked towards this complexion with tremulous and eager hope, which I dared not to trust myself or to question, but which, intermixed with obscure forebodings of evil, made my heart sicken in my bosom. Chapter 20. I sat one evening in my laboratory. The sun had set. The moon had just risen from the sea. I had not sufficient light for my employment, and I remained idle in a pause of consideration of whether I should leave my labor for the night or hasten its conclusion by unremitting attention to it. As I sat, a train of reflection occurred to me, which led me to consider the effects of what I was now doing. 3 years before, I was engaged in the same manner, and had created a fiend whose unparalleled barbarity had desolated my heart, and filled it with bitterness remorse. I was now about to form another being, whose dispositions I was alike ignorant. She might become 10,000 more malignant than her mate, and delight, for its own sake, in murder and wretchedness. He had sworn to quit the neighborhood of man, and hide himself in deserts, but she had not, and she, who in all probability was to become a thinking and reasoning animal, might refuse to comply with a compact made before her creation. They might even hate each other. The creature who already lived loathed his own deformity, and might not conceive a greater abhorrence for it became his eyes in the female form. She also might turn with disgust from him to the superior beauty of man. She might quit from him and be again alone, exasperated by fresh provocation and being deserted by one of his own species, even if they were about to leave Europe, the inhabitant of the deserts of the New World. Yet one of the first results of those sympathies was which the demon thirsts would be children, not that place of devils would progeny upon earth, who might make the very existence of species of man a condition precarious and full of terror. Had I a right for my own benefit to inflict this curse upon everlasting generations? I had before been moved by such visions of the being I had created. I had been struck senseless by his fiendish threats. But now, for the first time, the wickedness of my promise burst upon me. I shuddered to think that the future ages might curse me as their pest, whose selfishness had not hesitated to buy its own peace at a price, perhaps the existence of the whole human race. I trembled and my heart failed within me, when, looking up, I saw the light of the moon, the demon at the casement. A ghastly grin wrinkled his lips as he gazed on me, where I sat fulfilling the task which he had allotted to me. Yes, he had followed me in my travels. He had wandered in forests, hid himself in caves, or taken refuge in wide and deserted heaths. He had now come to mark my progress, and claim fulfillment of my promise. As I looked on him, his countenance expressed the uttermost extent of malice and treachery. I thought, with sensation of madness, on my promise of creating another like him, trembling with passion, tore to pieces the thing on which I was engaged. The wretch saw me destroy the creature on whose future's existence he depended on for happiness, and with a howl of devilish despair and revenge, withdrew. I left the room and, locking the door, made a solemn vow in my heart never to resume my labors, and then, with trembling steps, I sought my own apartment. I was alone. None were near me to dissipate the gloom, to relieve me from the sickening oppression, the most terrible revis. Several hours passed, and I remained near my window, gazing at the sea. It was almost motionless, for the winds were hushed, and all nature reposed under the eye of the quiet moon. A few fishing vessels alone speckled the water, and now and then a gentle breeze wafted sound of voices as fishermen called to one another. I felt the silence, although it was hardly conscious of its extreme profoundity, until my ear was suddenly arrested by the padding of oars near the shore, and a person landed close to my home. In a few minutes after, I heard the creaking of my door, as if someone endeavored to open it softly. I trembled from head to foot. I felt pertinent who it was, and wished to rouse one of the peasants who dwelt in a cottage not far from mine. But I was overcome by a sensation of helplessness, so often felt in frightful dreams, when you in vain endeavor to fly from impending danger, and was rooted to the spot. Presently I hear the sound of footsteps along the passage. The door opened, and the wretch who I dreaded appeared. Shutting the door, he approached me, and said in a smothering voice, "You have destroyed the work which you began. What is that you intend? Do you dare break your promise? I have endured toil and misery. I left Switzerland with you. I crept along the shores of the Rhine, along its willows, islands, and over summits of the hills. I have dwelt many months of healthsome England, among the deserts of Scotland. I have endured incapable fatigue and cold and hunger. Do you not to destroy my hopes? Begone! I do break my promise. I never will create another like you, equal in deformity and wickedness. Slave, I before reasoned with you, but you have proved yourself unworthy of my condescension. Remember, I have power. You believe yourself miserable, but I can make you so wretched that a light of day will be hateful to you. You are my creator, but I am your master. Obey. The hour of my irresolution is past, and the period of your power is arrived. Your threats cannot move me to do an act of wickedness, but they confirm me the determination of not creating another companion device. Shall I, in cold blood, set loose upon the earth a demon whose delight is in death and wretchedness? Begone. I am firm, and your words will only exasperate my rage. The monster saw the determination on my face, and gashed his teeth at the impotence of anger. Shall each man, cried he, find a wife for his bosom, and each beast have his mate, and I be alone? I had feelings of affection, and they were acquired by detestation and scorn. Man, you may hate, but beware, your hours will pass in dread and misery, and soon the bolt will fall which must ravish you from your happiness forever. Are you to be happy while I grovel in the intensity of my wretchedness? You can blast my other passions, but revenge remains. Revenge, henceforth, dear light or food. I may die, but you, my tyrant and tormentor, shall curse the sun and gaze on your misery. Beware, for I am fearless and therefore powerful. I will watch with willingness of a snake, and I will sting with its venom. Man, you shall represent the injuries you inflict. Devil keys, and do not poison the air with these sounds of malice. I have declared my resolution to you. I am no coward and bend beneath words. Leave me, I am inexorable. It is well, I go, but remember, I shall be with you on your wedding night. I started forward, exclaiming, Villain, before you cite my death warrant, be sure that you are yourself safe. I would have seized him, but he eluded me. I quitted the house with precipitation. In a few moments I saw him in his boat, which shot across the waters with arrowy swiftness, and as soon as he lost among the waves, all was again silent. But this words rang out in my ears. I burned with rage to pursue the murderer of my peace and precipitate him into the ocean. I walked up and down my room, hastily and perturbed, while my imagination conjured up 1,000 images to torment and sting me. Why had I not followed him and closed him in the mortal strife? But I had suffered him to depart, and he had directed his course towards the mainland. I shuddered to think who might be the next victim sacrificed to his insatiable revenge. And then I thought again of his words, "I shall be with you on your wedding night." That, then, the period fixed for the fulfilling of my destiny. In that hour I should die, and at once satisfy the extinguishable of his malice. Prospect did not move me to fear, yet I thought of my beloved Elizabeth, where tears endless sorrow, when she should find her lover so barbarously snatched from her. Tears, the first I had shed in many months, streamed over my eyes, and I resolved not to fall before my enemy without a bitter struggle. The night passed away, and the sun rose from the ocean. My feelings became calmer, if it may be calmness when violence and rage sinks into the depths of despair. I left the house in the horrid scene of the last night's contention, and walked on the beach of the sea, which I almost regarded as an insuperable barrier between me and my fellow creatures. Nay, I wish that such should prove the fact still across me. I desired that I might pass my life on that barren rock, wearily, it is true, but uninterrupted by any sudden shock and misery. If I returned, it was to be sacrificed or to see those whom I loved die under the grasp of the demon whom I had created myself. I walked about the island like a restless spectre, separated from all it loved, and miserable in the separation. When it became noon, the sun rose higher. I lay down on the grass and was overpowered by a deep sleep. I had been awake the whole of the preceding night. My nerves were agitated, my eyes inflamed by watching and misery. The sleep into which I now sank refreshed me, and when I woke, I again felt as if I belonged to the race of human beings like myself, and I began to reflect upon what had passed with great composure. Yet still, the words of the fiend rang in my ears, like the death of Camille. While they appeared like a dream, yet distinct and oppressive as the reality, the sun had far descended, and I sat still on the shore, satisfying my appetite, which had become ravenous, with the oaten cake, when I saw a fishing boat land close to me, and one of the men brought me a packet. It contained letters from Geneva, and one from Clerval, inviting me to join him. He said that he was wearing away his time fruitlessly, where he was, and letters from friends he formed in London, desired his return to complete the negotiation they had entered into the Indian enterprise. He could no longer delay his departure, but as his journey to London might be followed, even sooner that he now conjectured by his longer voyage, he entreated me to bestow as much of my society on him as I could spare. He besought me, therefore, to leave me solitarily isle, and to meet him at Perth, that we might proceed southwards together. This letter, as a degree, recalled me to life, and I determined to quit my island in expiration of 2 days. Yet, before I departed, there was a task to perform, on which I shuddered to reflect. I must pack my chemical instruments. For what purpose I must enter the room which had been the scene of my odious work, and I must handle those utensils in the sight of which was sickening to me. The next morning at daybreak, I summoned sufficient courage and unlocked the door of my laboratory. The remains of the half-finished creature, whom I had destroyed, lay scattered on the floor. I almost felt as if I emerged the living flesh of a human being. Paused to collect myself and entered the chamber. With trembling hand, I conveyed the instruments off the room. But I reflected that I ought not to leave the relics of my work to explicit the horror and suspicion of peasants, and I accordingly put them into a basket, with a great quantity of stones, laying them up, determined to throw them into the sea that very night. And, in the meantime, I sat upon my beach, employing the cleaning and arranging of my chemical apparatuses. Nothing could be more complete than the alteration that had taken place in my feelings. since the night of the apparition of the demon. I had, before, regarded my promise with gloomy despair as a thing that, with whatever consequence, must be fulfilled. But I now felt as if I had a film been taken before my eyes, and what I had for the first time saw clearly. The idea of renewing my labors did not for one instant occur to me. The threat I had heard weighed on my thoughts, but I did not reflect that a voluntary act of mine should avert it. I had resolved in my own mind to that degree another one like the fiend I had first made would be an act of the beast of most atrocious selfishness, and I banished from my mind every thought that could lead to a different conclusion. Between 2 and 3 in the morning, the moon rose, and then, putting my basket aboard a little skiff, sailed out 4 miles from shore. The scene was perfectly solitary. A few boats were returning towards the land, but I sailed away from them. I felt as if I was about the commission of a dreadful crime, and avoided the shuddering anxiety of any contact with my fellow creatures. At one time the moon, which had been before clear, was suddenly overspersed by a thick cloud, and I took advantage of the moment of darkness and cast my basket into the sea. I listened to the gurgling sound as it sank, and then sailed away from the spot. The sky became clouded, but the air was pure, another chilled by the northeast breeze that was then rising. But it was refreshed me and filled me with such agreeable sensations that I resolved to prolong my stay on the water, and fixing the rudder in the opposite direction, stretched myself on the bottom of the boat. Clouds hid the moon, everything was obscured, and I heard only the sound of a boat as its keel cut through the waves, and the murmur lulled me. In a short time I slept soundly. I don't know how long I remained in this situation, but when I woke, I found that the sun had already mounted considerably. The wind was high, and the waves continually threatened the safety of my little skiff. I found that the wind was northeast and must have driven me far off the coast from which I had embarked. I endeavored to change my course, but quickly found that if I again made an attempt, the boat would be instantly filled with water. Thus situated, my only resource was to drive forward the wind. I confess that I felt a few sensations of terror. I had no compass with me, and was so slenderly acquainted with the geography of this part of the world that the sun was of little benefit to me. I might be driven into the wide Atlantic and feel all the tortures of starvation, or be swallowed up in the immersible waters that roared and buffeted around me. I had already been out many hours and felt torment of burning thirst, a prelude to my other sufferings. I looked up on the heaven, which were covered by clouds that flew before the wind, only to be replaced by others. I looked upon the sea. It was to be my grave. Fiend, I explained, your task is already fulfilled. I thought of Elizabeth, of my father, and Clerval, all left behind, of whom the monster might satisfy his singularity and merciless passions. This idea plunged me into a revive so despairing and frightful that even now, when the scene is on the point of closing before me forever, I shudder to reflect on it. Some hours passed thus by degrees as the sun declined towards the horizon. The wind died away into gentle breeze, and the sea became free from breakers, but these gave place to a heavy swell. I felt sick and hardly able to hold the rudder, when suddenly I saw a line of high lands toward the south. Almost spent as I was by fatigue and dreadful suspense, I endured for several hours. This sudden certainty of life rushed like a flood of warm joy to my heart, and tears gushed from my eyes. How mutable our feelings, and how strange is that clinging love we have life even in excess of misery. I constructed another sail with part of my dress, and eagerly steered my course towards land. It had a wild and rocky appearance, but as I approached nearer, I easily perceived the traces of cultivation. I saw vessels near shore and found myself suddenly transported back to the neighborhood of civilized men. I carefully traced the windings of the land and hailed a steeple which I at length saw issue from behind a small pottery. As I was in a state of extreme debility, I resolved to sail directly towards the town, as a place where I could almost easily procure nourishment. Fortunately, I had money with me. As I turned the promontory, I perceived a small, neat town and a good harbor, which I entered, my heart bounding with joy at my unexpected escape. As I occupied in fixing the boat and arranging the sails, several people crowded towards the spot. They seemed much surprised at my appearance, but instead of offering me any assistance, whispering together with gestures that might be produced at me in the sight a sensation of alarm. As it was, I merely remarked that they spoke English, and that I therefore addressed them in that language. My good friends, said I, will you be so kind to tell me the name of this town and inform me where I am? You will not know that soon enough, replied a man with a hoarse voice. Maybe you are come to a place that will not prove you much to taste, but you will not be consulted as your quarters, I promise you. I was extremely surprised on receiving so rude an answer from a stranger, and I was also disconcerted on perceiving the frowning and airy countenances of his complexions. Why do you answer me so roughly? I replied. Surely this is not the custom of Englishmen to receive strangers so inhospitably. I do not know, said the man, what the customs of English may be, but what is the custom of Irish to hate villains? While the strange dialogue continued, I perceived that the crowd rapidly increased. Their faces expressed a mixture of curiosity and anger, which annoyed and in some degree alarmed me. I inquired the way to an inn, but no one replied. Then I moved forward. The murmuring sound arose from the crowd, as they followed and surrounded me. When an ill-looking man approached and tapped me on the shoulder and said, Come, sir, you must follow me to Mr. Kerwin's to give an account of yourself. Who is Mr. Kerwin? Why am I to give an account of myself? Is this not a free country? Aye, sir, free enough for honest folks. Mr. Kerwin is a magistrate. You are there to give an account of the death of the gentleman who was found murdered here last night. This answer startled me, but I presently recovered myself. I was innocent, and I could easily be proved. Accordingly, I followed my conductor in silence, and was led to the best houses in the town. I was ready to sink from fatigue and hunger, but being surrounded by a crowd, I thought it politic to rouse all my strength, that no physical debility might be constructed into apprehension or conscious guilt. Little did I then expect the calamity, in a few moments, to overwhelm me, and extinguish in horror, despair, all fear, and tell me to death. I must pause here, for it requires all my fortitude to recall the memory of the frightful events which I am about to relate, in proper detail, to my recollection.